Hello and welcome back to Commercial Radio. So today we're going to be looking at lecture 6 of 10, which is part of buying and selling and executing airtime. And today we're starting on 10.11, which is scripting. And within scripting, we're going to be looking at design thinking. But before we get into that, let's delve into what we looked at in the previous lesson. And in our previous lesson, we looked at the airtime sales team, brand knowledge, and developing relationships, where we explained how important it was to, or is rather, to establish these relationships and to keep them. And we said that there are 3 major players in the radio airtime sales process. And those 3 are the client, the media agency, and the radio airtime sales team. So the client is the one who holds the budget for the radio advertising, and they are the ones who have a brand strategy to sell a product or a service. And from there, they will consult with their media agency, and the media agency manages the radio advertising budget on behalf of the client, and they negotiate the radio station rates, and they make the actual bookings with the station. And then from there, the media agency speaks to the radio airtime sales team, and they are the ones who generate revenue for the radio station. They have targets that they need to achieve in order to make commission, and they implement radio airtime bookings on air and online. Okay, so that's the 3 players in radio airtime sales. So depending on how big the client is, they'll most likely make use of this media agency that we just spoke about, and within them there are a few players. So there are media planners, buyers, strategists, and analysts. And if we group them together, we call them media practitioners. Then we looked at brand knowledge. What is a brand? A brand is a thing that allows us to charge a certain price, so a premium, that consumers are willing to pay for a product or a service beyond what it will cost to create a product or to deliver that service. Okay, so what it comes down to, so according to Valerie Geller, it's a collection of emotions and beliefs that come to mind if a person sees a radio station's logo or meets one of its personalities. And a radio station's brand is its promise to its listeners. We looked at RAMs and how important RAMs are, so radio audio measurement, in terms of our listenership figures, okay, because that is how we measure our listenership figures. And from there, we use that data to take to potential clients to try to get you to buy into my radio station. And then we looked at radio media planning, and that is simply put the science and art of knowing where, how, when to execute paid radio advertising elements on relevant radio stations. And we said that a media plan is a document put together by a client or by the client's specialist agency that looks at, because it assumes that advertising is the solution to the client's marketing challenge, and it's necessary to purchase media space to reach the right target market for the client's marketing challenge. Okay, so if you want to follow along, you can go to your textbook to page 392. Creating radio commercials is a skill that audio producers and advertising agencies usually handle. These talented individuals must write the copy that the voiceover artist or the presenter will say, which we call scripting. They must also enable this copy to tell a story that will engage the listener and that will deliver a strong call to action. The call to action will inform the listener of what they must do. Lastly, the copy should be wrapped up in a good quality audio product that sounds pleasing, exciting, and fitting for the particular style of that radio station that airs it. Writing or scripting good radio advertising copy is both a science and an art. The science comes in writing simple, credible, original, relevant, and empathetic advertising messages. The art then is in the weaving together of all of this into a masterful story that will elicit a favorable response from the listener. Okay, so obviously you want your listener to like it. We refer to scripting as a science only because there's a systematic approach that we can take to building and organizing an advertising message that's clear, credible, original, relevant, and authentic to the agreed upon audience. This begins first with a very deep understanding of who the target of the message will be. This understanding comes from researching that audience and understanding their needs before you can develop an advertising message that addresses these needs to the audience. So simply put, once you know who the copy is for, making it clear, credible, original, relevant, and authentic is a little bit of an easier task. And this then brings us to design thinking. The model of design thinking is about framing a creative product and applying a process to land that product and to make it a reality. Developing a great radio commercial is a creative process. By using design thinking as a model for this and thinking through that process, we can arrive at the end goal of a relevant, original, authentic, and credible radio commercial. What does design thinking entail? It's a problem-solving approach based on searching for creative solutions. For instance, advertisers would use design thinking to find creative solutions to their problem, which is the problem of creating effective radio advertising copy. The specific design thinking model that we're going to start discussing today is the designing for growth, so D4G approach. This design thinking model looks at 4 basic questions to stimulate and guide the design thinking process. So the 4 questions that we're going to be looking at is what is, what if, what wows, and what works. In essence, what do these 4 questions entail for the creative process of a radio advert? What is explores current reality. What if uses what we learned to envision multiple options for creating a new future. What wows makes some choices about where to focus first. And then what works takes us into the real world to interact with actual users through small experiments. So each of these 4 questions will be examined in detail. Let's start with number 1. The first question, what is? The first question, this is the first question that we ask in any design or creative process. So the first question that we'll ask in any design or creative process should be, what is? This is where an empathetic approach is required. In this phase, we want to gain an understanding of the problem that the product or the service is trying to solve. This we do through research and targeting. The process first involves engaging with users of the category of the product or service. These aren't necessarily direct users of the product, but the users of products similar to the product in question. So you engage by first asking questions to get articulated needs, wants, and desires, and then you observe respondents to get the same unarticulated data. This will give you data with a rich and deep empathetic understanding of the user and how they use or need the product or service. Imagine you're tasked with the responsibility of writing an effective radio commercial selling washing powder. Your first step should be to engage with users of the category of this product. So in other words, conduct research on the target market that purchases cleaning products, and more specifically, washing powder. You should ask questions like, what decisions go into buying washing powder? Who does the buying of washing powder? What do you look for when you're buying washing powder? When do you buy your washing powder? And what is the reason that you buy this specific washing powder? These questions will help you understand who you are scripting for. This emphasizing phase is necessary to understand the current user of the product or the service you are scripting for. So, in the case of the washing powder, this would be those users who use the specific washing powder that you are advertising. Again, engaging in a research methodology that uncovers both articulated and unarticulated data helps us to understand why people are choosing to use the product and why they are doing so in a specific context. In this phase, it's also important to discover the target market's articulated and unarticulated needs. Articulated needs are expressed when a researcher explicitly asks target market respondents what they do and why they do it. And the respondents answer the explicit question. Unarticulated data is implicit questioning, where the researcher uses a variety of techniques in order to try to reveal the subconscious reasons why a person would be motivated to behave in a particular way. Quite often, what we say we do is not actually what we do. There are various reasons for this, which we will examine later on, but research on both articulated and unarticulated market needs can be utilized to really get at why an audience behave in a certain way. Once you understand the user's needs, the next step is to spend some time trying to understand the brand's needs. In the radio world, a brand's needs are what a business requires in order to strengthen its brand strategy. To determine what the brand's needs are, we need to ask the following questions. What are you expecting to achieve with the advert? Could it be to create awareness or maybe to increase sales by 5%? What are the specific messages that you are trying to drive with your message? What other forms of media advertising is the brand using? Are they effective? Are they meeting their advertising targets? Is there any specific tone or manner that should be used to best describe the brand and its personality? What are the benefits of the product or the service, and why should the listener believe this? If the listener does not believe that the commercial is espousing true benefits of a product or a service, then they can simply discard the message. The brand's reason for being is to convince the listener that it is worth paying more for the product or service than simply its cost price. What sells the brand and its products or services apart from its competitors? What is the unique selling point? What sets the brand and its products or services apart? No need to say. What is the single-minded thought or message you want the listener to leave with after hearing your radio advertisement? Now, after you've done this research, you're done with the what is, the empathizing phase of the design thinking process. Next, we're moving on. The what is part of the process is the most critical phase of the design thinking approach, because without genuinely understanding your intended and without genuinely understanding your intended or current client and their objectives, you will very rarely be able to script an advert that's clear, credible, original, relevant, and authentic to either of these stakeholders. Now we move on to the second question, what if? The second question is the what if phase in the design thinking process. This is where brainstorming or ideating takes place and is the creative part of this whole process. Here, we are trying to tell a compelling story for the radio commercial by using the data that we've gathered previously. Before you get into the ideation phase, keep in mind the basic principles of great stories or great storytelling. So, storytelling wouldn't have been something that you would be very familiar with up until this point, something that you're going to be focusing a lot more on in your second year, but it's extremely important, okay? So every great story usually has 4 parts. Firstly, the hook. This is the first sentence or 2 in the script that helps to hook the listener. It's the opening gambit that gets the listener interested, actively listening and investing in the story. A hook is normally between 7 to 14 seconds, but normally within the first 7 seconds already, you have to hook someone. Second, the crumbs. These are mini payoffs that keep the listener interested in the story. You should aim for a twist or a turn in the script every 7 seconds or so. Thirdly, we have the payoff. The payoff is the reason that the listener listened. It's the laugh, the message, or the information they gained from listening to the entire advertisement, okay? So it's kind of like the crux of the story. And then number 4 is the blackout. This is a simple way of indicating that it's near the end of the advert. After all the vital information provided has been provided and the advertisement has been clearly concluded. Script writers can choose to incorporate each of these 4 parts into any of their adverts, even if it's a straight hard sell, so direct advertising or over advertising. A compelling story is often experienced by listeners as excellent and effective advertising communication. In the brainstorming or the ideating phase, it's important to keep an open mind regarding the format you'd like to use for the advert. What are some of the types of radio advertising script formats? These can come in the form of announcements, dialogues, vignettes, testimonials, and narrative-based storytelling. Let's start there by looking at announcements. This is a one-person voice talking directly to the listener. The copy must be simple to understand, clear, and concise. The announcer must speak to one person using active language. Questions can definitely be asked. This format is usually very effective in the hook. This should be written in the style that your intended audience speaks, It's like having a conversation with your listener. An example of this could be where the script starts with an announcer trying to get a listener's attention. So something like, hey, you, yes, you, listening. Did you know that 7 out of 10 mothers think adverts that quote statistics about mothers are lies? Okay, so that's an example. If we move on to the second one there with dialogue. Great dialogue is like being invited into an interesting conversation between at least 2 people. The key to good radio dialogue is that it must be natural and authentic. Don't create a conversation between 2 people that would never happen in the real world. Unless this is done specifically for comedic effect, stay away from these unnatural conversations. An example of an unrealistic comedic dialogue could be a conversation between a small child and their mother about the exact nutritional content of her school lunch. Additionally, use voices that matches the potential client and language that they'll use and understand. Keep your sentences short and effective. The third one under what if, vignette. A vignette is a brief, evocative description. Start the radio spot with a brief description of the problem that the product or service will provide a solution for. Then show how the product or service alleviated the product and how it provides the listener with the best solution. Remember to have a clear call to action. A vignette does not always follow the steps of the storytelling in a linear process and often doesn't include a hook, a middle, or a big payoff. A vignette includes very little to no plot details. An example of how to start a vignette for a pesticide commercial could be the sweet smell of the freshly baked apple crumble filled the air. Not too far away was a tiny red ant climbing on the kitchen counter. It caught the smell of the freshly baked crumble and then it goes from there. Next we have testimonials. One could use professional experts, celebrity endorsements, or ordinary people who have used the product or service to attest to its effectiveness. Hearing real people vouch for the brand being advertised is a great, authentic way to engage the audience. An example of this could be using a professional sportsman to sell a deodorant brand. Something like, "Hi, I'm Mary, a professional rower, and I stay dry and smelling fresh with clean and dry for women." Or using an ordinary real person to sell that exact same deodorant brand. So something like, "Hi, I'm Jane, an accountant. I work in an open plan office and I need to stay smelling clean and fresh, working long hours under stressful conditions. That's why I use clean and dry to keep me smelling fresh all day long." And then the last one there is narrative-based storytelling. So narrative-based formats are scripts that have been specifically created to include a definite plot that uses characters and has a central conflict or a crisis. The conflict needs to be best solved by your client's product or service. Use the 4 steps to effective storytelling previously discussed and make sure that the narrative has at least 2 characters and that the conflict is real and that it can be imagined and bought into by the listener. Examples of this could be feuding neighbors that need better walls, brothers and sisters that share a room and need room dividers, or families that can never agree on takeaways for dinner. The characters can then solve their problems with the use of a specific product or a service. Remember, as Shakespeare once said in Hamlet, "Brevity is the soul of wit." Use as few words as possible to create the ideas and the concepts to entertain and tell your story. Part of the ideating phase is constricted if you go into the process with a set idea of the format to adopt. Keeping the different types of format options in mind helps you brainstorm ideas that best articulate the problem your product or service is solving. It's occasionally possible for you to combine different formats to come up with the best possible solution for your client. So keep an open mind throughout this process. Once you've brainstormed ideas and the format, the advert will start to take shape. Remember a few critical points as part of the checklist for radio advert. Write so that the listener can clearly picture your advert. So use visual, active, and stimulating language. Have a definite emotive response in mind. What do you want the listener to feel? Have a definite call to action. What do you want the listener to do? The hook is more important than the payoff. Without the hook, you have missed the listener. Always remember the what is phase and all that data that you have collected during this phase. Write for the audience and try to establish strong connections with them. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the first 2 questions that we're looking at today. Okay, and that is the what is and the what if. So just in summary, scripting is both a science and an art. To start scripting, you need to understand who the target of your message is. You need to understand, this understanding comes from you doing research. And then once you know who you are scripting the copy for, make it clear, credible, original, relevant, and authentic. So we are looking at design thinking in terms of the 4 questions that goes into it. And design thinking is about framing a creative product and applying a process to land that product and make it a reality, okay? Design thinking entails a problem-solving approach based on searching for creative solutions, and we are looking at designing for growth, so D4G. This model looks at 4 questions to stimulate and guide the design thinking process. So what is, what ifs, what we looked at, what if, what we looked at today, and then what wows and what works. What is explores the current reality. What if uses what we learn to envision multiple options for creating a new venture. And then what wows makes some choices about where to focus first. What works takes us into the real world to interact with actual listeners or actual users through small experiments. We said that the what is part of the process is the most critical phase of the design thinking approach, because without genuinely understanding your intended and current client and their objectives, you will very rarely be able to script an advert that's clear, credible, original, relevant, and authentic to either of these stakeholders. What we're doing in the what is phase is we're trying to determine what the brand's needs are, okay? So we want to gain an understanding of the problem that the product or the service is trying to solve. And this we do through research and through targeting. So we ask different questions. And to determine what the brand's needs are, we ask questions like, what are you expecting to achieve with this advert? Is it about creating awareness or to increase your sales, perhaps? What are the specific messages you're trying to drive? What other forms of media advertising are you using? Is there a specific tone or manner that should be used based? Oh, Vader, skryp daar. Is there any specific tone or manner that should be used to best describe the brand and the personality? What are the benefits of the product or the service? Why should the listener believe this? What sets the brand and its products or services apart from its competitors? So what's its unique selling point? And what is the single-minded thought or message you want your listeners to leave with hearing your radio advert? So after the what is phase, we looked at the what if phase, which is the second step in your design thinking process. And this is where the brainstorming or ideating takes place and is the creative part of the process. So we're coming up with ideas. And here we're trying to tell a compelling story for the radio commercial by using the data that we've now gotten from the first phase, keeping in mind the storytelling. And within storytelling, we get the hook, the crumbs, the payoff, and the blackout. The hook being that first 7 seconds in which we're hooking you. The crumbs being the little payoffs that we drop on the floor, like in Hansel and Gretel's story, for you to find your way, okay, to keep your way. The payoff is what you've actually tuned in for, whether it's to laugh or whether it was to get more information. It's the whole reason why you listened, and then the black off is a simple way of indicating that we're near the end of an ad. In the brainstorming or ideating phase, it's important to keep an open mind regarding the format that you'd like to use. And we said that there are different types of formats then. We said that there are announcements, dialogues, vignettes, testimonials, and narrative-based stories. Once you've brainstormed the ideas and the format, the ad will start to take shape. And here you need to keep a few critical points as part of a checklist for this ad. Write so that the listeners can clearly picture your ad, so use visual, active, and stimulating language. Have a definite emotive response in mind. What do you want your listeners to feel? Have a definite call to action. What do you want them to do? The hook is more important than the payoff, okay? Without the hook, you've missed the listener. Always remember the what is phase and all the data that you've collected during this phase. Write for the audience to try and establish strong connections with them. And that brings us to the end of this lecture. Next, during the next lecture, we're going to look at what WOWs in the design thinking process in the context of how to produce an actual radio spot. Okay, so we're going to be looking at both what wows and what works next. For now, however, if you want more information with regards to writing effective copy for radio commercials, you can go and look at the 10 steps outlined in the Radio Advertising Bureau's article, which came out in 2007. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye for now, up until next time. Bye.